I'm pretty sure anyone watching this has walked into a store or shop or any other retail nexus, and when they were buying something that they habitually get, you found out that the price has raised, and then you get to the cashier and they say something like, "Oh, the things are expensive because the supply is expensive." And how true is that? It's actually quite true, because the suppliers, they have also raised their prices, and the retailers have to make ends meet, which is why they have to raise their prices as well. So what causes the suppliers' prices to be skyrocketing the way they do? It's because of supply itself. Allegedly, a lot of stuff is becoming more and more scarce, especially resources and manpower. And sometimes we ask ourselves, what is the reason for this? And I guess sometime this year I found out the reason, because one of my friends who was selling at an event was charging $20 for these ice creams that were in like these tiny styrofoam cups, and I would not buy that with a gun to my head. No way, I would not buy that either. But he cited this reason for the fact that the prices were so unconscionable. He was like, "Hey, Ukraine and Palestine and Russia and Iran and Gaza." And even though this sounded loaded, he was right. Because what do you think happens in a war? In a war, people aren't just going to be busy cooking and producing resources and farming like they normally do. No. War, it takes a toll on people. So there's obviously going to be less supply. And take a look at Russia. Russia is one of the key players in the supply for diesel and other gas. So without it, there's a scarcity of transport, and with that scarcity of transport, the prices of transport go up, which is a crying shame, because there was a time when getting in a taxi from point A to point B was 6 rand. Now, and that was back in 2016? Yeah, 2016, round about 2017. And now it's 2024. It's $13. By 2027, the taxi will be $20. And it's scary to think about it. But the people in the taxis who drive them, who have raised the prices to that extent and have made that the standard, they're not really unjustified in doing that, because operating a taxi takes gas, which is something that we are severely lacking in. Now, it's easy to take what I just said as justification to blame the wars between Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Hamas, Iran, and Palestine, and blame those particular countries and their wars for the inflation. But it really begs the question as well. It brings more questions than answers. Who is responsible for it? Who is responsible for inflation? And it's important to know this, because if we're going to kill the snake, we have to cut off the head. So who really is the head of the inflation? And the answer to the question of the root of inflation is none other than the fact that the customer and consumers are responsible for inflation. Dun, dun, dun! Yeah, I didn't expect a plot twist like that. The Reserve Bank of Australia published a dissertation stating that the root cause of inflation could be that consumers are getting more job opportunities and more jobs in general, as well as better wages, which allows them to spend more, and that spending leads to a demand. And even though demand is not quantifiable, it can be perceived. It's more of a sensory thing. When you see people going into your store continuously buying non-stop, just like that, you will know that there's a demand. And especially if you think that there are more customers than the previous day, whether or not you're counting them, you will notice a spike in demand. And what does this do? They will think that what does this do for the the retailers themselves, as well as the suppliers, they will believe that their product is so sought after, so indispensable, that then there will come a point where they raise the prices. It's more of a test run type thing, because the taxi industry in my country probably raises the prices of the taxi every single year by 1 rand. Fine. But but there was a weird case, okay? There was a weird case, and I feel like it's a phenomenon of sorts where the product was so ingrained into the where they perceived the product to be so ingrained into the customers that they actually thought that it was so indispensable that they took a huge risk. I remember going into a store that I frequented a lot when I was about to finish high school. They sold nuts. There were many nuts in that plastic, and they were 2 rand 50 cents. I would buy them every single day for like a week, and then at the second week, I just hear that they went from 2 rand 50 to 6 rand, and I thought this was highway robbery, because I obviously did not come with 2 rand 50. I did not budget. I did not come with 6 rand. I did not budget for that much. When I came into the store wanting nuts, I would have came with at least 4 or 3 rand, because I thought that the prices would raise gradually, not all of a sudden. How? Notice a certain motif from the reason that I gave and the reason that the Reserve Bank tried to give, and it's that whether the supply is static or it's on the decline, as long as the demand is high, it is an incentive for people to keep their prices increasing, because they know that the customers and the rest of the consumer base is locked in on it. With that said, you can see that inflation is going to have a lot of consequences in the long run, because right now, look at the cost of living, look at the cost of food, look at the cost of electricity. I remember being able to buy electricity for a week with 20 bucks when I was 10, and that stuff would take you through the entire week. By bucks, I mean 20 rand. Let that sink in. Now, like, probably 60 bucks even a day is not even going to get you through 12 hours. That's why most people pay 500 or more for electricity for the entire month. Running a business itself is also expensive. You have to pay workers, you have to pay utilities. That's why employees are getting laid off, and that's why youth unemployment is lower than ever. Even though I don't condone child labor, I do think that people under the age of 18 should at least get jobs that'll allow them to make enough money for them to start their lives, because when they turn 18 and they move out of their parents' houses, what are they going to do? They have to have like enough money to get them through college, maybe buy food that isn't ramen, and maybe rent a place as opposed to buying one, so that they can live somewhere temporarily. Getting employed itself is a really difficult thing. Like, not just youth unemployment, but unemployment itself is a serious concern, because people are qualified, people are trying, people are willing to put in the hours, but maybe that a certain business doesn't have the space to accommodate them, because an employee costs money. An employee can make the business money, but their services are not free. Now, as a consumer myself, even though I'm not a fan of inflation, I am not going to sit here and pretend like I don't understand why people inflate their products and services, because there is competition. Industries are so bloody competitive. There are so many other people who want to replicate what they're doing or take their market share. Also, running a business, producing things, that requires upkeep and maintenance and informing people about your business. It's not easy. You also have to be aware of your surroundings. The first rule of business is location, location, location. So you can't just sell things at a low price knowing what you're already working with. If it's poor resources and heavy competition, or a demand, an insatiable demand from consumers who are constantly expecting the most, otherwise you're not going to make anything. You'll in fact be at a net loss. So in some regard, it's understandable why the businesses do it. And also, in a business, you have to keep up and you have to leave a certain footprint. Your business has to really resonate. That can take years. And in a matter of years, so many things can happen. Stock markets have crashed. Prices for supplies themselves change. Certain industries have evolved or devolved. For certain trends, they elapse, and you have to keep up. That requires research. Research and development and market research is expensive. And let me tell you, if you run a certain business and it's been around for a month and the business just shuts down out of nowhere, I guarantee nobody's going to miss or even remember the business, because there are plenty of other industries willing to take the specific one's spot. There are plenty willing to take their spots, meaning that that one is not necessarily ingrained into people's psyche, and it hasn't left such an impact. For example, let's take certain singers, for example. Like, they have to keep reinventing themselves, changing their image, setting trends, or chasing them. Because if a certain singer who isn't a legend but just came out now, they dropped one album, the album is successful, and then they go mum for another year, they're gonna be forgotten, and they won't be reminded of this. They won't be reminded or remembered by people unless somebody brings them up. The cost of living comfortably in Cape Town is 10,000 rand a month for one person. That factors in food, rent, transport, electricity, which I don't know why, because like South Africa has load shedding, but I heard Cape Town, they have generators and they don't really experience load shedding, so good for them. And Cape Town, they have so many successful industries and schools, which is why they are capitalizing on people and crippling them with all these costs. And while it is sad that people have to pay this much just to live there, I have to say, when I look at it, it seems worth it. Like, look at the place, the education. They have amazing schools there. They have amazing places of work. They've got like a beach, so there are so many industries that can be made off the sea. Like, Cape Town is no joke. I guess a possible other unorthodox reason that can be put forth for inflation is the stock market crash. Now, plenty of people hear about the stock market every day. Stocks have risen, stocks have fallen. I'm investing in stocks. I got a broker for my stocks. But it's understandable why the same subset of people don't know what that even means. Stocks themselves are shares in companies. A share is an ownership in a certain company. When you buy stock, you have an ownership of that company. You become a shareholder, and at the end of the month, you get the return on the money you made plus plus a certain increase, right? So that's how it becomes a worthwhile investment. Now, the stock market is the platform for people to buy stocks. So when we hear that the stock market has crashed, it means that the value of the shares has depleted. That sounds amazing. I can buy shares as I wish. I can buy as many shares as I want now. you can, but at what cost? Because they're going to be of less value, and when they are of less value, you get a lower return on your investment. This depletes the wealth of the investors themselves, and it in a way tanks the industry. So with one industry down, wealth and the spending of a country goes down, and businesses aren't going to like that. They're not going to like that so much that they're going to need to see a return in the inventory, in the money that they spend to keep their business running. So what are they going to do? They're going to increase the prices. Since 2020, a time where there was a lot of inflation, but I don't need to explain the reason for that, the price of sugar and flour and beef roast have gone up by 50%. Listen to this. Two basic things like flour and sugar have gone up by that much. I can't even imagine other essentials. Look at this horrible one that I don't even like talking about. In May 2022, petrol was 11 rand 50 cents, and somehow, all of a sudden, it has increased from that in 2024 September to 26 rand and 46 cents, particularly diesel. Yo! Helic, now we're finished. And when you see that nonsense, you should thank your friend Putin, because he's busy withholding all of the diesel production. He's too busy invading other countries to care about that. But I want people watching this to actually think about this for a second, because how are you going to pay your bills? Please think about what you're going to do to support yourself. If you're going to have a kid, how are you going to support that kid? You have to think about, how am I going to afford a car? How am I going to afford maintenance on that car? How am I going to afford petrol? How am I going to afford groceries, school fees for you and or your child, depending on your situation? How are you going to afford electricity? How are you going to afford water? You have to think about these and realize that in the future things are going to be possibly even rougher. How do we know that things are going to deflate? And that's when we have to really get serious and tell ourselves that we have to say something, we have to do something. What are you going to do to combat this? Are you in your own business going to raise the prices of your products? It's not going to work, because you might be fighting fire with fire, and possibly increasing the potential for you to get money in a return on the inventory that you bought. But you have to think about the fact that the world is such an interconnected place, because our main suppliers are the US, the superpowers, China, Russia, Japan. And if they go down, they take us with them. This is how their actions affect us. It's kind of like a chain. The reason the retailer is expensive is because the supplier is expensive. Why is the supplier expensive? Is because the manpower is also expensive. Why? And the transport is expensive to transport the resources. Why is the transport expensive? Because the diesel is expensive. Why is the diesel expensive? Because there is a shortage in diesel production. It's unfortunate, but true. And why is there a shortage in diesel production? I already talked about that. Don't make me repeat myself. Is it possible that we can be able to connect with the people in charge of Federal Reserve banks, because they are in charge of finances and pricing and the rights of people selling, as well as the rights of the consumers? They try to avoid unethical practices when it comes to the specific prices, but also look out for both the consumer and the people selling to them. So is it possible we can reach out to them, or maybe the Ministry of Finance, schedule a meeting with them, write them an email, tell them that the ways that we're concerned for our future and somehow influence them into making the world as a unit lower their prices, so that as a whole we're able to lower our prices and live in a more manageable way. Because if we were able to do it in 2014, why can't we do it 10 years later? We were living back then when the tax was $6, when the electricity was $100 a month, when diesel was probably $200 or $300 a month. We still had the ability to live. Is it possible to approach economic advisory councils? Because as these prices go up, the worker's salary stays stagnant, meaning that we're less than likely to afford these things. So please, don't just complain about inflation. Try to make a change.